Hello, chess enthusiasts. Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the USCF publication Chess Life. Now, this is the most recent one. It came out in July 2023. And I'm going to go through and show you guys one of my favorite features of the US Chess Life magazine, and that is the Solitaire Chess. I don't know why I like it so much. Maybe it's the calm, the focus that you can have in playing, or maybe it's the idea that you can get a score out of it and it tells you whether you're getting better or not. I invite you to play along with me. Grab a pencil and a piece of paper and be prepared to think about these moves. Maybe pause the video when you need to, if you need an extra minute to study the position. The way this works is we're going to go ahead and play one side of the board of a master game, and we're going to try and predict what the moves were, and we'll get a score based on our selections. Once we total up the points, there's a nice little grid over here in the corner. I'll show that to you. Let's get started. Alright, so the game we're going to go through is a master game played between Miguel Najdorf and Glucksberg. This was played in Warsaw in 1929. This time, we're actually going to be playing as black. This game starts off d4, f5, so we're playing a Dutch, c4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, knight f3, d5, and then e3. So these are the pre-moves, and this is the position we're going to start from. Alright, so let's go ahead and analyze this position and see what the best move we think is for this position. I'm going to go ahead and remind you that you can feel free to pause these before I make my move and I reveal the final answer. Now, I'm not a Dutch player, so any of this is going to be based on principles and understanding the position. So getting started, looking at the position, we have two pieces attacking the d5 pawn. We have the d4 pawn that's fully supported and we're not attacking it at all. My inclination is to go ahead and move the dark squared bishop to pin the knight. Let's just give this one more quick think. The b knight looks promising as far as a development, but I'm not really sure if I want it to be on c3 or d7. And so because I'm not quite sure where I want it to go, I kind of want to hold off on developing that piece. The bishop on c8 doesn't really have a great place to go right now, and developing the queen too early is usually a mistake. So I've made my selection. Go ahead and make yours. My selection is bishop to b4. Let's go ahead and reveal the answer. So you can give yourself 5 points if you got c6, bishop e7, or knight c6. Alright, on to the next move. White now plays bishop to d3. Bishop d3, right here. Sure looks like black is prepared to castle now. So let's take a look at this position and see if we can figure out what we need to do now. So I believe that white wants to castle here. Our light squared bishop still doesn't have a great place to go. Moving the knight to d7 might allow us to play e5 at some point. It's very clear the knight can't go to b6 now. The bishop on f8 now looks like it's in the way of possibly castling. I see no immediate threats or attacks of hanging pieces. Everything on the white side is fairly well defended. So at this point, we're probably not attacking, but continuing our development. My two candidates that I'm looking at are bishop e7 and knight to d7. I don't think capturing in the center right now is good for us. And I don't think moving the knight on f6 helps our position at all. So my idea here is we're going to go knight to d7. That's my move. That's what I've selected. If you've got a better option, go ahead and choose it now. We'll go ahead and reveal the answer. The actual answer is bishop to d6. Let's see what they have to say. In turn, black prepares to castle, assuming that the b8 h2 diagonal and fighting for the e5 square. You may accept full credit for bishop e7. Let's go ahead and continue looking at our position. White castles. White gets ready for the action, moving his king out of the center. So we are now ready to take a look at our next move. We prepared to castle last move with bishop to d6. I think we go ahead and follow that plan and castle. So that's my thought. So there's my move. I think we should castle. And their move 7 is also to castle. 5 points if you decided to castle as well. Najdorf follows suit, removing his king from the center as well. You can accept full credit if you played knight to e4. So knight to e4 was another possibility if you thought that was the option. Now we look at white's next move. Knight to e2. Knight to e2 is white's move here. This prepares to shift the knight over to the king side, but a more logical move was b3, with the idea of flanking the queen bishop. So what they're suggesting is that this idea here would have been a better idea. So even grandmasters make what we can call mistakes or inaccuracies. Alright, so it's now our turn as black to try and figure out what we want to do in this position. So there's a principle from Dan Heisman that I remember from years ago that said the weakness of the last move. And the idea here is that every time you move a piece, you create a weakness somewhere else. And so in moving the knight, we've freed up these squares. These are less protected squares because the knight has now moved. So if we look at the position, we still have our 3 pieces over here that are completely inactive. I still don't know where the bishop on c8 wants to go. I think the knight may want to go to d7 or maybe even a6, trying to support a c5 push, but I don't think that's the move here. I think more likely we're going to try and use our advanced f5 pawn. If we were to play something like knight to e4, we start invading on white space and targeting squares in and close to the king as well as the center of the position. If the bishop captures, we can recapture with the f pawn, and that would allow us to have a nice open rook targeting this king position. It would also free up lines for the queen to come over once this knight here is dealt with. So there's a lot of tactical possibilities that kind of get developed from that move. It also starts to free up this c8 h3 diagonal, allowing for a push at some point and really having our bishop be active. So I'm really thinking that the knight to e4 might be the move here. Let's just check that there's no other better moves. I'm not sure which side the queen wants to go on. The bishop on c8 and the knight on b8 don't really have clear squares for me. So I think the best idea right now that I have is to break a principle, which is to move a piece 2 times in the opening, and that is to play knight to e4. So there's my move. I've locked it in. Make your decision, and we'll look at the answer. The answer here, 5 points if you played knight to d7, queen to e7, or b6. White's next move is knight to g5. But this is a mistake. A better way to attack the e6 pawn would have been to go to knight to f4. It's now our turn. Let's take a look at what we want to go for. The e6 pawn is under attack. The simplest way to defend it would be either to move the d7 knight or to move the queen to e7. Moving the d7 knight to b6 walks into a fork, so that's clearly not the move of choice. I don't see any quick counterattacks that would allow us to attack something of greater value. One option that I'm starting to see a seed of a tactic is that the knight, if it could go to f4, and the bishop on h2 work together and start to attack the king's position. Now, I don't see how that tactic works right now for us, but it is definitely something to keep in the back of our mind as a possible tactic in the future. So looking at this position, I think I'm going to go with queen to e7 as my choice. Let's take a look at the solution. And the solution was bishop takes h2 was the actual solution. A version of the classic bishop sack, clearly winning a pawn. You may take 5 points partial credit for the less good knight to g4. So you get 6 points if you played bishop takes h2, giving check. Now, to explain why this is going to work so well, we can see that if the king takes, we can check with the knight, and then the queen is attacking this knight. So there's the idea here behind that move. So white now plays king to h1. This doesn't help. It was better to remove the bishop and accept the consequences. So again, this is an inaccuracy. It's now black's turn. I'm now inclined to consider the knight to g4, supporting the bishop, and opening an attack for the queen on the knight that's on g5. However, we still have the issue of the e6 pawn being attacked. Considering pawn pushes here, neither of them seem promising at this point. There is now the possibility of playing knight to b6, but that seems counterproductive. We've just started an attack on the king side. It feels like moving pieces towards the king side would be the best option. A move like e5 does seem to go in line with our kingside attack. However, the knight could still come to e6 and fork our rook and queen. That doesn't seem like the best option. We need to address the possible fork. Moves like queen to c7 don't work either. The fork is still there. My selection is queen to e7. Let's go ahead and check the answer. The answer was knight to g4, supporting that bishop. Najdorf defends his h2 bishop and unveils an attack on the g5 knight. So that was worth 6 points if you found that move there, that the knight goes to g4. You can add a bonus point if you analyze that knight takes e6, queen to h4 is crushing. So here, the reason why I didn't play this move is because I was concerned about the e6 pawn. If the knight takes queen to h4, the text is suggesting is going to be a really dominating move. f4 is white's reply. White anchors the g5 knight, temporarily stopping the intrusion of the black queen to h4. So now we need to take a look at our position. My eye was immediately drawn to the idea of attacking the e3 pawn, forking the queen and the rook. However, the bishop here is still defending. There's the possibility of h6, kicking the knight, or there's the possibility of moving e8 and getting into h5. I don't see a good square for the knight to add to the attack. The light squared bishop is still pretty completely out of the position. So my two candidates are either e8 or h6. So my idea here is that I'm going to go ahead and choose the move h6. The reason I'm thinking h6 might be better is that it comes with a tempo on the knight. Moving the queen to e7, white has a free move to try and address the position, and then we would have another move to get to h5. And I think that just gives white too much time to try and counter our plans. So h6 feels like the best option in this position. That's my move. You can go ahead and make your own, and let's check what the answer is. The actual move is queen to e8. This shows another way for the black queen to enter the fray along the e8-h5 diagonal. You may accept full credit for a rook lift, rook to f6. So rook to f6 you could also have full credit for. White plays g3. Glucksberg hopes to flee with his king to g2. Another try might have been to go rook f3, but black would still have the upper hand. It's now black's move. We move the queen to penetrate the position here on h5. I think following up that move seems to make sense. We should be clear to consider all our options though. At this point, I can't see any other candidate moves that I think are as strong as queen to h5. That's my selection. You can go ahead and make your own. And let's check what our answer is. So move 12 was in fact queen to h5. You can give yourself 4 points if you got that. Najdorf's attack sails along. A discovered check is now being threatened. Moving the bishop would give us a discovered attack. King goes to g2, following through on his escape plan. He is still hopeful to be able to survive this position. So when we consider building an attack on the king, we should consider what squares are available to the king. These squares are currently not available to the white king. So we have this light square diagonal that is currently available that the king might be able to run around to. Moves like knight takes e3 check might be something to consider. It would force the king to move. It would also take away this square from the king, but it would allow this one to move forward. Now, most likely if we were to play knight takes d3, white wouldn't give us the queen and would take bishop e3. If bishop takes e3, I don't see a clear follow-up. 2 pieces against all of the white pieces that are on the king side doesn't seem enough to finish the attack. And if we're short pieces on an attack, sometimes the best way to continue is to bring more pieces in. This bishop still seems completely out of the position. This knight to f6 could root around and possibly take play in the position. That seems to be a longer approach. I think more likely moves like rook to f6 and then h6, allowing for this battery here to play on this long diagonal. I think more likely are moves like a rook lift, rook to f6, and then h6, allowing the queen and rook to work together to attack the king's position. Okay, I've made my selection. I'm going to go ahead and play rook to f6. There's my move. Bishop to g1 was the solution here. This was a 6 point. So if you played bishop to g1, give yourself 6 points. This is a clearance sacrifice. Najdorf empties h2 for the invasion. You may accept full credit for knight on d to f6, a move we were considering. shifting more force over to the battle zone. White now plays knight takes g1, accepting the sacrifice. You can go ahead and give yourself a bonus point if you analyze that rook takes g1 allows queen to h2 and mate on the next move. Alright, let's take a look at the position. So what I'm considering now is that queen to h2 check forces the king to f3. If we follow that up with queen to h1, the king is then forced to go to e2, running the way the king wanted, but is it far and fast enough? Queen to g2 check would take away every square but e1. The king on e1, our queen on g2, and our knight still on g4. Is there a follow-up here from this position that would be decisive? With the bishop, the queen, and the rook all working together in this position, it would be hard to see how to finish off the king on e1. We do have the option for our queen that was on g2 to take g3 with check, allowing the king to run further to the queen side over on d7. While all those moves are very forcing, I think there must be a better option to try and keep the king on the king side of the board. I still think moves like queen h2 are likely the first step, but maybe playing a move like knight to f6 and following it up with knight to e4 might give us a stronger position, keeping the king from being able to run onto those squares, adding another piece to the attack. Alright, I've given my thoughts. I'm making my selection. I think the move is queen to h2 check. Let's check the solution. Queen to h2 is the move. You can give yourself 4 points here. And the magazine says that no other move makes sense. King to f3. This was a forced move, just as we predicted before. It is now our turn as black to figure out how to follow up. So I've already analyzed this position quite a bit. There are checks. There's a possibility of bringing the knight in. There's a check here, which sacrifices the knight, but I don't see a purpose behind the knight sacrifice. A move like queen to g2 would be mate if the queen was protected. However, I see no way to protect the queen on g2 at the moment. Moves like h5, h4 seem like possibilities, allowing the queen to come into g3, but that feels somewhat slow. Knight to f6 still seems like an option, or maybe a move like e5 should be considered. If we play e5, pawn takes pawn seems like the likely option, at which point then a move like knight takes e5 seems promising. F takes knight, and we could follow up with knight takes knight, knight takes the pawn, giving check. Now the white king would still have a flight square to go to, but we might be able to move the knight here with check, closing in the position quite dramatically. I'm just considering other options now. Queen to h1 is still a choice, but the king is forced to e2 here. From e2, the queen could come to g2. The king is forced to e1. And from e1, I don't see a way to finish the king in the center. I'm going to go ahead with the idea of e5. That's my idea. Go ahead and make your selection, and let's check the answer key. And the move was, in fact, e5. A serious resource. The threat is e4 check. So I did see that as an option. e4 check. The bishop takes, and then the pawn takes, and this makes a really devastating position. I believe it looks like mate. No, it's not mate. The knight would be able to cover. But this is definitely not a position white wants to find themselves in. D takes e5 is white's reply. Taking with the f pawn doesn't fare any better. Now we have to consider our follow-up. My original idea was to do a knight sack. I wonder if there's a better option. Let's explore this option. Knight takes e5 check. F takes e is fairly forced, at which point a move like knight takes e5 check forces the king to come to f4. We no longer have a dark squared bishop, and we have a knight on e5 that's under attack. Is there a way to attack the king and support that knight? Well, we would have the option to move the knight to g6, giving check. The king would be forced back to f3 here. Then a move like f4 might be an option to try and activate the rook on the column with the king. It would also allow the light squared bishop to possibly get involved. Before I consider sacrificing a piece for an attack, let's consider some other moves just to make sure. Queen to h1 is a check, but as we've said before, I don't see the follow-up. Moves like b5 or b6 seem too slow to activate. We might be able to consider a move like d4 to displace the pawn on e6. However, that opens up this bishop to be more involved on this king side, and that might actually help give black a few more resources. I meant white. It might give white a few more resources. All right. I'm inclined to make sacrifices. I haven't seen all the way through this position. If you want to go ahead and pause and make your choice, I'm going to take a risk. I'm not fully calculated out on how the win is coming out of this, but I do think the move here is knight takes e5. Let's go ahead and see if I'm right. The move was knight on d takes e5 check. That was a 6-point question. You can get full credit if you take with the other knight, so you could have taken with the g knight. Now, fairly forcing is f takes e5, and now it is black's move again. We've already calculated some of this position, but we should just double check our thoughts. We have the possibility of f4 here. However, that does not hang the knight, because the bishop would then support the knight. We have the option to take e5 with check. We even have the option here to play queen h1 check. However, that does seem to allow the king to continue to escape. I think the move here is knight takes e5 check. Let's find out if I'm correct. Go ahead and make your selection. And the move was knight on g takes e5 check. And that was a 5-point question. The king is fairly forced to f4. And now we have to consider our follow-up. The knight is now in danger of being captured. We have knight to g6 as an option, giving check and saving the knight. Another possibility might be knight takes bishop, also giving check. However, that removes one of our attacking forces and brings white's queen into the position in a little more active way. I think the move that makes the most sense to me is knight to g6. I don't see any other moves right now that would be both attacking and defensively sound to protect our knight. We'll go ahead and make that move and check to see if I was correct. The move was knight to g6 check. This is the best move, is the only comment here, and that was a 6-point move. King now goes to f3, again, almost completely forced. We approach the position where I was unclear as to the follow-up. I think we can clearly see that if we wanted to get a draw in this position, we could continue to shuttle the knight back and forth here, and we would be able to get a threefold repetition. But with the attack that we've developed thus far, it really seems like we have a better option. A move like f4 still seems like an option to try and activate the rook and the bishop. One idea might be to explore other checks. Queen to h5 is another check. The king moves out of the way, protecting the knight and offering a queen trade. No, that doesn't work. The knight is covering the square, so the king would not be able to go to f4. The king would be forced to go to one of these 3 squares, one of these 2 squares, at which point we could capture the knight, regaining our piece investment, but this allows white's pieces to start to become activated. I'm strongly considering a move like f4. Move like bishop d7 might be a choice to activate the a rook. All right, if you've thought your way through the position, great. I'm going to go ahead and make my move. I think the move is f4. All right, move 19 is in fact f4. This was an 8-point question. Najdorf explodes the position open. Both the c8 bishop and the f8 rook are poised for the kill. E takes f4 is white's reply here. On g takes f4, black has a mate in 2. So if you can explore that idea. But let's go ahead and take a look at the position as it is. We've taken away these squares using the queen. This square is taken away by the bishop. The king is currently safe on f3 and on e3. And these squares are used by the white pawns. So if we look at this position now, we have the king only has 2 squares. We could consider a move like knight to e5 check. This would force the king to e3, the pawn being pinned to the king. We could then follow up, queen takes g3 check. However, then we have the possibility of the queen or rook interposing. We do have a move like bishop g4 check, threatening to win the queen. So king takes g4 is fairly forced, at which point a move like h5 check might be in the cards. the king would be forced back to f3. We could then follow up knight to e4 check, where white would be forced to e3. We could then follow up with a check on knight to g4. Also, an alternative that I just considered was blowing the position open with something like rook takes f4 check. Bishop could take, and that kind of ends that line. So I don't believe that's the choice. Knight to h4 looks interesting, as it also gives check, but I'm having a hard time seeing the follow-up. Pawn takes, and this square is not a safe square for our queen, so that doesn't feel like the right direction to go. So my two main ideas that I've considered that I like are either knight to e4, knight to e5, or possibly sacking a bishop back on g4. One more option that I'm considering is something like knight to g4 check, allowing g takes g4, and then playing something like bishop g4 check, king takes g4, queen to g2 check, forces the king to go to h5, and then maybe a move like g6, giving check. The king then is forced down to h6, at which point we could play queen to h4 check, and I believe mate. So go ahead and make your choice for the move that you want to play. I'm going to play knight to h4 check. I think that's the move here. Let's take a look. The move was bishop to g4 check. That was one of our candidate moves that we did consider. This is a sparkling shot indeed. White's best is to simply surrender the queen and play king e3. However, in this position, the king did take on g4. Let's see the follow-up now. We do have a check on h5 with the pawn, forcing the king back to f3. That seems wasteful. We have a move like knight to e5 now, giving check and covering the flight square, which would allow pawn takes e5, opening the line for the two rooks to face each other, at which point now maybe the h5 check works. Other possible options might be to bring the rook over, or even to try and move the rooks and support them, stacking them on the f-file. All right, I think I'm going to make my selection. My selection is to go ahead and play knight to e5. That's my move. Go ahead and make yours. And the move here is in fact knight to e5. This was a 6-point question. So go ahead and give yourself 6 points if you got that one right. Knight to e5 check. Okay, so f takes e5 is the move there. We now have the open f-file. The rooks are facing each other. Go ahead and decide what your move is here. I think I have my move, so make your selection. I'm going to go ahead and play h5, which I think is mate. It is. And therefore I know that must be the solution. That was a 5-point question. And this is a final nice brilliancy, elegant, timeless, classic gem of a brilliancy. So this is a great game. Very interesting to go through. I know I made a lot of mistakes. I don't know how you guys did on this. Okay, so to finish this off, go ahead and total up all the points that you earned from the game. My total was 55, which puts me solidly in the category of 18 to 1999. which is fairly accurate. My over-the-board USCF rating is just over 1800. So my 55 score is fairly accurate to my over-the-board play. Go ahead and compare yourself to the chart on the screen now. If you enjoyed this, if you want to do more of these, go ahead and put a message in the chat, and we can make this a regular thing. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and check out other videos. Have a great day.